The RC21 committee have very kindly made space for this session, and we're very excited about the conversations we'll be having. It will be recorded, and if you want to watch it again, it will be on the RC21 website. I'm delighted to be able to thank the RC21 Executive Committee and the President, Talia Blokland, for supporting an initiative of the RC21 to look into how it is that more African scholars might publish in so-called international journals, which operate quite restrictive criteria often for publishing. So we really want this session and discussion to be part of an active initiative to try and transform aspects of that. And we've invited 4 African-based or prominent African scholars to come and talk with us, and various people on this very nascent RC21 Commission on African Publishing will be introducing the session. Julianne Boudreau is so kindly offered to help us with the translation, and she'll be helped by, I'm just trying to get back to the chat function, sorry. She'll be helped by Ayla Tissot from the University of Geneva as well. So there'll be some translation available. If you would rather listen in French, then there'll be a translation, an interpretation button that comes up at the bottom of the screen. It's like a world. You shouldn't touch it. If you're happy with what you're hearing on the channel, this is the main channel, don't touch the interpretation button. If, however, you'd be more comfortable to listen to a French translation of the English presentations, go down to the world, press the world, and click on the language you desire to hear. If you desire to hear French, then click on French, and Julianne will be offering some translation. If the talk is in French, and we'll be hearing from Nadine Machikou in French, then if you rather listen to it in English, please go down to the bottom, click on the button and click the language you desire, which is English. Otherwise, don't touch the button if you're dual language perfect. All right, so so many thanks to all of you for agreeing to present, and to those of you who are joining us. We're delighted to have you here. If you want to only see the speaker, I suggest you go up to the view button, top right-hand corner, and click on speaker view, and then you'll have a good view of the speaker. Otherwise, we've got lots of people here, so you'll struggle to work out who's what. And I have to also, Julianne asked me to mention that the translators are volunteers, ordinary bilingual people, and they're going to be doing a sort of everyday job of sharing with you their understanding of the discussion. So don't get annoyed, just hang in there and listen to the storyline. All right, I might introduce now, oh, sorry, quickly before I go on, we have apologies.
Yeah. Sorry, just a moment. I think the translation is not enabled yet. I don't know, Elizabeth.
There it comes.
Okay, there it comes. Thanks.
So only click it if you're not happy with the language you're hearing. Thanks, Julianne. And we just offer some apologies from Vanessa Watson, who's had urgently to undergo an operation today. And with COVID, you don't get a choice. When do you do it? You do it when the hospital can put you in. So we wish her very well at the moment. So I'm going to ask everyone to keep their cameras and mics off unless you're part of the panel. So panelists, please keep your cameras on as if you're happy with that. And I turn over to Laurent Fourchard from Sciences Po Paris to introduce the first round of panelists. Laurent.
Thank you, Jenny, and hello everybody. I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you, Jenny, for launching this initiative. I think it's really excellent. So we have today an incredible set of international scholars who are in common not to be only active researchers publishing on Africa, but who have the particularity to be engaged in one way or the other on publishing urban and African studies research from within the continent. And this is the reason for organizing this panel, to help to rethink the presence of scholars based in African institutions publishing on both urban and African studies. So one common place probably circulating about African academia is that not many things are happening in the continent in terms of publishing an international conference. Okay, this experience presented today tell another story, I guess. So we want to hear about these initiatives, not only about knowledge production, which is an old story for the continent, but about how publication is taking place from within the continent, without being too naive neither about the challenge that this represents. So we want to know, we want to engage a kind of productive dialogue between this initiative in the continent and urban-based scholar journal located in the north, where it is getting incredibly difficult to get published. So we have 4 scholars that I very briefly present, and I'm very pleased that they are there because I'm pretty passionate about their work. First, Nadine Machikou is a professor of political science at the University of Yaoundé in Cameroon. Her work focuses on the expression of violence, political and moral economy of emotion, on public policy and community integration in Africa. She has a triple experience in structuring and organizing academic communities in Cameroon and beyond in Africa, first as directors of seminars at the International War College of Cameroon, as director of the Center for Study and Research in International and Community Law at the University of Yaoundé 2, and third as the vice president of the African Association of Political Science, which is the continental parent body for political scientists in Africa, and which has been moribund for 10 years, and which has been resuscitated a few months ago. And Nadine has also an experience, a very interesting experience of publication in France, both in France and Cameroon. So she is a co-editor of the leading journal Politique Africaine, which is a landmark journal in Francophone Africa. And she has this double experience for thinking and supporting publication, both in Africa and in Europe. And this is why we are very happy to have Nadine here with us. So welcome, Nadine. Edgar Pieterse is the founding director of the African Center for Cities at the University of Cape Town. He holds the South African Research Chair in Urban Policy. He publishes extensively on urbanism in South Africa, in Africa, and in the Global South, more generally. He also curates exhibitions and intervenes regularly on the politics of urban problems in Africa, in South Africa especially. So the African Center for Cities is known for all urban studies scholars, I guess. It was founded in 2007, and it was a modest center at that moment. But the idea was to focus on urban research, not only on Africa, but in the Global South, but from an African perspective. And so from a modest center, starting in 2007, it had become an incredible place for hosting tens of international and African-based research projects. And there is also a large policy of publication at the ACC. So ICC publishes papers, books, and journals. And so we're very keen to learn and to listen to Edgar to discuss about this. So welcome, very, very much welcome, Edgar. At the first caller, we have Saheed Aderinto, who is professor of African history at the Western Carolina University in the United States. He is author of numerous papers and books on colonial Lagos, on Nigerian 20th century on various topics, Fuji music, politics of sexuality, animal studies, and many other things. So among many other things, Professor Aderinto is the founding president of the Lagos Studies Association, which was set in 2017. So the LSE, so Lagos Studies Association, is an international interdisciplinary organization of academics and practitioners who first interest was on Lagos. But I mean, in 5 years ago, the LSE was a small academic community. It has become a big academic committee of something like 1,000 members, which does not discuss only Lagos. It's not only about Lagos. It's instead a place where conversation is taking place between urban studies and African studies in general, and between academics, planners, artists, and activists, and between Nigerian scholars, African scholars, and other scholars. So the LSE has been very active in promoting junior scholars who have difficult to access international journals. So he will tell us more about the LSE, and especially his experience in publishing both in urban studies and African studies. Welcome, Saheed. And to end up this session, we also wanted to hear what are the changes and the difficulties and the experience for a scholar based in an African institution. And we thought that Kingsley Madueke was the best person to speak about that. He has an incredible experience of navigating Africa, Europe, America in the last 10 years. So Dr. Kingsley Madueke has a master in conflict management and peace studies from the University of Jos, central part of Nigeria. He then earned a PhD in political science at the University of Amsterdam. He was a Marie Curie Fellow, an Urban Studies Foundation visiting fellow in the Department of Urban Planning and Public Policy, University of California, Irvine, the last year and this year. So he has published many excellent articles on urban violence, armed riots, urban conflict in a number of international journals. And here again, Kingsley located his research probably at the crossroad of urban studies and African studies. So what are the difficulty, interest, and challenge to publish in these journals? And are there any opportunities to publish in Nigerian or African-based journals? So that's some of the questions he might address. So welcome, Kingsley, welcome all of you. Sorry for being too long, but I mean, it's quite short, quite a challenge also to sum up some so incredible academic career.
Thank you so much, Laurent. That's wonderful. I very much appreciate that. So we're going to start off with Nadine Machikou. Nadine, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for letting me to start. I want to especially say thank you for letting me say, at least share the experience, which is, I would say, mainly challenges. So I think this conference is so important, so relevant. One of the key aspects of all this decolonial turn in knowledge and how we reinsert Africa in this at the center of knowledge is also how do we produce knowledge and where do we put Africans in the middle of this. So I'm very grateful. I also want to thank Laurent, of course, which I want to refer to as one of the most generous and steadfast researchers I have met so far. Thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity. I want to beg to speak in French. I started translating my intervention, but I will speak in French if you don't mind. Il y a une série d'interrogations qui portent justement sur les initiatives permettant à la fois sur le terrain de la publication, de mettre en valeur le travail des chercheurs. Je pense que pour répondre à cette interrogation, il faut d'abord souligner le fait que le travail des universitaires africains est soumis à une double ségrégation, qui est une ségrégation, bien sûr, une forme de ségrégation horizontale, c'est-à-dire qu'il faut en regarder les champs. Aujourd'hui, nous nous intéressons aux études urbaines, mais il faut regarder aussi les champs où la possibilité pour ces travaux de circuler de façon disons, efficace se fait. Donc, il faut qu'on soit attentif à cette question. Il y a aussi la question, bien sûr, de la ségrégation verticale. Jusqu'à quel niveau, dans quel type de revue, jusqu'à quelle, disons, quelle échelle est-ce que ces travaux ou ces universitaires peuvent circuler? La question de la mobilité des universitaires doit être corrélée aussi à la question de la mobilité de leurs travaux. Je pense qu'il faut tenir les deux en même temps. Ça, c'est le premier point. Le deuxième point, je crois, c'est la question de l'inexistence de communautés académiques. Vous savez, lorsque on publie, et vous le verrez très bien dans les dynamiques de publication, de circulation des savoirs venant d'Afrique ou d'universitaires, on verra ces espèces de baobabs universitaires dont la circulation est facilitée, qui sont très reconnus. Et en même temps, justement, dans cette ségrégation qui est aussi générationnelle, on voit qu'il y a très peu de jeunes, très peu de nouveaux, il y a très peu finalement de renouvellement de chercheurs. Alors, je voulais rentrer par ce point parce que je crois qu'on ne peut pas discuter ici sans poser plus généralement la question de la structuration du champ de l'enseignement supérieur et son déclassement, son faible financement. Je sais que cette question va se poser peu ou prou pendant cet échange, mais la question de la gouvernance universitaire est une question clé. Alors, à titre personnel, bien sûr, puisqu'il faut partager son expérience, à 3 niveaux, disons, j'ai expérimenté les difficultés que cela est. de mettre disons, en visibilité les travaux. D'abord, je dirais à l'échelle interne de mon université où j'ai été pendant 3 ans à la tête d'un centre de recherche en droit international. Je suis politiste, il faut dire, donc cela pose aussi la question de la gouvernance universitaire. Donc, les chercheurs qui peuvent se trouver, disons, enfermés dans des logiques de production et de valorisation de la recherche, qui sont des logiques déterminées par la gouvernance, la mauvaise gouvernance, et qui déterminent leur capacité à produire. En l'occurrence, dans le cadre de ce centre de recherche, j'ai essentiellement eu recours, parce que je n'avais pas de financement de la part de l'université, j'ai eu recours à quelques appuis, notamment d'organisations qui étaient agissant dans le champ du droit international. Donc, je pense que cet élément important qu'il faut mettre dans la conversation, c'est la question des financements privés, et y compris d'ailleurs dans le cadre de ces mécanismes de visibilité. C'est la façon dont ces financements privés peuvent permettre une production de savoir qui est une production de qualité. En l'occurrence, par exemple, le CICR, qui est agissant ici et qui a accepté de déposer son fonds documentaire dans le centre de recherche que je dirigeais, a, de mon point de vue, été un appui essentiel aussi dans cet effort de soutien en fait à la production des savoirs. Cette première expérience, il faut la coupler avec une deuxième qui est, à l'échelle du continent, le travail que fait une organisation comme le CODESRIA, pour lequel, à travers les groupes nationaux de travail, il y avait des mécanismes, disons, d'appui à la recherche. Bon, on sait que de toutes les manières, cette recherche, même à l'échelle, elle est sous-financée, c'est vrai, et le CODESRIA, donc disons, cette instance africaine qui est chargée de coordonner la recherche en sciences sociales, et finançait des groupes nationaux de travail, et c'est à travers ce mécanisme qu'on pouvait mettre à contribution et soutenir en fait le travail des jeunes chercheurs, c'est-à-dire des doctorants, des étudiants en master. Et disons que ce mécanisme-là, qui est le financement d'un groupe national de travail, et donc des initiatives fondées sur des projets, est un formidable instrument, finalement, permettant de renforcer les capacités à la fois d'écriture, les capacités de publication. Ce que je dis, naturellement, doit être mis en lien avec la situation particulière, finalement, de la qualité de la recherche à l'échelle du CODESRIA. De très, très bons chercheurs ne vont pas nécessairement placer leurs travaux dans les supports de cette instance qui pourtant finance quelque peu, mais qui vont essayer, peu ou prou d'ailleurs, avec plus ou moins de succès, d'insérer leurs travaux dans les espaces, dans les espaces internationaux. Donc, je pense qu'il y a ce deuxième niveau, qui est ce niveau à l'échelle continentale, qui est souvent sous-exploité, parce que quand on regarde le CODESRIA, on ne voit que essentiellement les big names. Le CODESRIA a une politique des big names qu'on connaît, tous ces grands auteurs, Samir Amin, Achille Bembe, Paulin Outondi, un certain nombre de personnes. Et finalement, le niveau finalement de renouvellement, de dénichement des talents, je trouve, finalement, a été relativement faible. Cette deuxième expérience, je dois finalement l'adjoindre à la dernière, qui est celle de mon travail à l'échelle de politique africaine. Alors, la revue politique africaine, c'est une revue qui est basée au Nord, mais je voudrais dire que c'est une revue qui est fondée sur un projet, et ce projet, très clairement, était aussi, finalement, de mettre en présence des épistémés produits sur le Sud et, dans une certaine mesure, par le Sud. Et ces travaux-là, finalement, grâce à la revue, depuis maintenant 40 ans, puisque nous avons fêté les 40 ans de la revue, ont été largement à la pointe finalement de l'identification de nouveaux chercheurs et la publication de nouveaux objets.
I can hear you now, Juliane, on the channel. Yes, thanks. Why don't you go ahead and give us some idea of what Nadine is about?
Maybe I should just try in English, if it is easier. Jenny.
Continuez, c'est bon, merci.
D'accord. Donc, OK. Donc, je disais qu'il y a cette troisième expérience qui est celle de politique africaine. C'est une expérience qui est tout à fait nouvelle, puisque j'arrive à la rédaction en chef, qui est une rédaction avec 4 personnes. Et je voudrais dire de manière justement très forte que l'approche de cette revue, qui est une revue associative et qui par définition, disons par orientation, c'est une revue qui va aller chercher et accompagner disons des jeunes chercheurs. Et je trouve que c'était aussi une des choses qui m'intéressait en particulier dans ce projet rédactionnel. Et assez vite, en tout cas, avec mes collègues, nous avons discuté de la possibilité de renforcer la présence de la revue sur le continent à travers des événements qui sont organisés sur une base beaucoup plus régulière sur le continent. Il me semble que exotiser le regard que l'on porte sur l'Afrique va aussi se faire par le fait que des chercheurs africains ont accès à politique africaine. Et donc, lors de alors cet événement qui a été utilisé, qui a été mobilisé comme finalement un instrument puissant sur lequel dont je voudrais souligner l'importance, la question, les ateliers d'écriture. Eh bien, les ateliers d'écriture sont justement une des stratégies à partir desquelles nous entendons renforcer l'accompagnement des jeunes chercheurs. Alors, en l'occurrence, la revue peut, à travers ces ateliers d'écriture, dénicher, accompagner des jeunes chercheurs qui ont un projet qui est embryonnaire. Dans le cas d'espèce, par exemple, pour l'atelier d'écriture qui a été organisé il y a quelques années maintenant, la possibilité aussi d'être prise en charge était aménagée. Et je trouve que ça, clairement, ça a un effet très puissant dans la capacité de la revue à s'ouvrir, à tendre la main à des jeunes chercheurs et à s'ouvrir en fait à des chercheurs qui autrement n'auraient pas pu atteindre le standard, parce qu'une fois de plus, structurellement, on ne peut pas mettre de côté la question des inégalités, qui sont des inégalités structurelles, matérielles, numériques entre les universités du Nord global et les universités du Sud. La dernière chose que je voudrais souligner, qui me semble important, c'est le fait que la revue de plus en plus sollicite des évaluateurs sur le continent. Et je pense que ça, c'est super important parce que le fait d'ouvrir non seulement la publication, mais aussi l'évaluation de la revue à des chercheurs africains me semble permettre d'adresser là aussi clairement cette espèce de mythe des revues qui sont des revues inaccessibles, qui sont des revues inatteignables. Donc voilà un peu les quelques points sur lesquels je voulais rentrer dans cette conversation, en insistant en fait sur l'idée que il y a quelque chose de très puissant qui se joue en ce moment, qui est effectivement ce tournant décolonial, mais ce tournant décolonial qui ne peut pas être que incantatoire. Il est nécessaire que les capacités des chercheurs soient à l'écriture, à la publication, soient renforcées, mais ce tournant décolonial va aussi aller de pair avec la création de nouveaux espaces. J'ai parlé de politique africaine et cette volonté de renforcer sa présence africaine. Et il y a la revue Global Africa qui a commencé, qui est maintenant à son deuxième appel, et qui est une revue orientée essentiellement justement vers précisément la prise en charge de cette question de la capacité des chercheurs, de la circulation des savoirs, de la valorisation de ces savoirs. C'est une revue qui est financée, dont la question du financement est clé, une fois de plus. Donc, je voulais, à travers ces 3 ou 4 points d'entrée, souligner à quel point il est déterminant de mettre en place des dispositifs d'accompagnement à l'écriture. Et aussi, le dernier élément qui me semble fort dans le cas de Global Africa, c'est la question du numérique, la question des publications de revues en ligne. C'est-à-dire le numérique est aussi ce mécanisme qui va permettre de renforcer justement de réduire les écarts et de renforcer la présence africaine. Voilà, en quelques mots, ce que je tenais à partager avec vous. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Nadine. C'était très intéressant, but I didn't understand it all, and I'm sure that most people from English language backgrounds are eager to understand well what Nadine has talked about. I think there was a little trickiness with the translation. Julianne got going after a little while. Laurent, I don't know if you would be willing to offer a couple of thoughts for us in relation to Nadine's comments.
I think this is very important what Nadine just said. I mean, that's incredible because she has this double we're referring to. So her experience in Codesria, which is a major institution in Dakar, which is covering all Africa. I think one of the problems identified, despite the fact that this is a powerful institution, it's not thinking enough of publishing and assisting and supporting young PhD scholars and promoting them. So that might be a bias of the institution. I don't want to reduce the institution to that, but I guess you mentioned that, Nadine. And she also refers to the experience of Politique Africaine. So this is a French-based journal, but as Nadine is based in Cameroon, she also wants to promote something from within the continent, with especially writing workshop within the continent, and trying to have more African-based scholars also evaluating for the journal on the one hand, but also supporting a young scholar, because the problem is, of course, the young scholars to be published in the best journal. And so to do that, you have to probably do writing workshops in one way or on the other, and be based in Africa. And this writing workshop can help some of the younger scholars to publish in the best journals.
Thanks so much, Laurent. I also picked up that there's a caveat involved about that you can do all the support, but if there's ongoing structural problems, then with the institutional inequalities between North and South, these remain problematic. So thank you so much, Nadine. We really appreciate your time and energy for that. I'm going to turn now to Edgar. Thanks.
Thank you, Jenny. Appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thank you to you and Laurent for convening this panel and this conversation, and for the very generous introduction in the beginning. So I'm based at the African Center for Cities, and I will contextualize my own reflections, which is based on my own practice over the last 12 years or so, within the broader mandate or mission, if you will, of the ACC. And in this regard, it's maybe useful to just contextualize that there were a number of reasons why the center was established. And in the initial years, when people like Vanessa Watson, Sue Pornell, and others were part of a collective of trying to build this interdisciplinary platform at the University of Cape Town, there was these kinds of agreements that were arrived at within the first year, once we decided to translate what was a very broad intent into a more concrete experiment. And I guess the first one is very much in the vein of the point that Jenny has just made, that at the heart of the project is an epistemic critique of the Eurocentric overhang, if you will, with regard to the field of urban studies. And the idea was not to necessarily create just a counterpoint or to elaborate what the Southern perspective would be, but it was more to create a clearing ground, if you will, for testing different ideas, different methodological approaches, different conceptual frameworks, and so forth. And so one of the things that have been really important in ACC has been a heterodox atmosphere. And so, you know, there isn't necessarily a specific commitment to a very particular approach to decolonial theory or post-colonialism or anything like that. It's rather broader than that. And that's been important for how we think about publications as well. From the beginning, it was very clear, similar to what Nadine was talking about, that there was a need to, particularly within the urban studies community, foster stronger solidarity and exchange. And particularly universities in South Africa, and the university where I'm based, UCT, of course, suffered from both the period of South Africa's exclusion from global communities and processes, but also South Africa's pathology of exceptionalism. And so there was often not sufficient generosity and openness to learn from other practices on the continent. And we wanted to make sure that that was corrected from the beginning. We've also understood from the beginning that we needed to combine a different research agenda with rethinking curriculum and how do we train a new generation of scholars. And the fourth aspect that is very central to what we've done and how we've done it is this belief that we had to speak way beyond the academic and the scholarly community, that a big part of trying to grapple with different theoretical frames was very much about exposing oneself to a set of debates within the public sphere and a set of practices and critique that may not be in the register of scholarship, but is absolutely vital for rethinking what it is that we're trying to understand. And then lastly, the importance of institution building. And this remains an imperative. But we felt that it was necessary to not necessarily inhabit a very particular form of, if you will, university-based research institutions, but to always leave room for experimentation. And so we have certainly morphed through various iterations over the last 13 years. And I can say more about that. So that sort of sets the context. And what that meant was that from the beginning, we were interested in creating a multiplicity of avenues for publication, but also to be open to multiple genres. And I'll say a little bit more about that through a few examples later. We also understood that given both the institutional format of academic publishing, whether it's journals or academic publishers who take on books, either edited or single authored, that there was a built-in time frame. And it felt to us that some of the projects we were working on and some of the information we needed to get out couldn't be subjected to that 3-year lag that is often involved from the moment that research is completed and one starts to write up and analyze and so forth. And so thinking about having some bespoke publishing capability within the institution is something that's been there from the beginning as well. But we've also been very open to partner with both academic and trade publishers. And the trade publishers is very much because a lot of our work is meant to speak into policy communities and practice communities outside of very particular academic debates. And then what has always been clear to us, particularly if one is interested to draw in younger scholars, to bring in practitioners who may not be full-time within the academy, is to invest quite heavily in editorial support. And this is various kinds. This is from clarifying an argument to sort of technical editorial support and so on. But that's expensive, and it's not always been possible to do that. And if we look across various of our publications, it's also clear that, you know, we've always tried to bring both established and younger scholars together within single frames of projects and so on. And then lastly, similarly between academics and practitioners. Now, the examples of this sits on the ACC website, and I'm not going to speak to a really wide variety of expressions of this. I'll rather focus on my own practice over the last 12 years, just as one sliver of what is a much larger oeuvre of work and set of experiences. Some of the ideas that sit behind it, I've written up with colleagues in 2013 in Rogue Urbanism. Tao Teveng and I published a piece where we tried to locate the challenges of African scholarship within the larger political economy of knowledge production. And a couple of years later, Supanel and I wrote a piece in IJA about the connection between the kinds of research we invested in and what that might mean for various forms of publics and publication. What's been clear to me sort of over the last 12 years is the importance of really remaining open to a very wide spectrum of publishing format and genre. And, you know, so if we look at this particular continuum, we can see that the sort of academic world lives on one end of this. But what has been most interesting for me was when one was able to facilitate some articulation between some of these other forms and genres and academic scholarship. So to be very pedantic, you know, a lot of what we're talking about today is the instruments that is meant to service the scholarly, the academic community and audience. But a lot of my work has really been more about these other publics that we try and engage with, which involves a very wide range of genre and format. And all of these have very different institutional resourcing, capacity building, support implications. And I won't go sort of read through that list, but just to sort of flag that, I guess. So my own work and the publications reflect this is very much about holding this tension between the need for theoretical critique or thinking theoretically about urban problematics, but at the same time, not absolving oneself of the importance of proposition. And so this is really, this, if you will, intent and the kind of scholarship and research and advocacy that this has given rise to has also then informed the form of publications and so on. So what I've just done is to, on a timeline, put examples of publications that I've been directly involved with, either as author or editor. And the dividing line there, that red line, references publications that is very much focused about intervention, if you will. They're policy oriented, they're politically targeted, about intervening in very specific concrete debates. And the ones above the line is very much more in the scholarly vein, about engaging in the genre of a particular academic debate and responding to that. But within that, it varies tremendously in terms of approach. So for example, Rogue Urbanism is a typical case where we both responded to academic debates in the broader field of urban studies and urban theory, but also demonstrated the power of bringing artistic representation, poetry, fiction, and so forth into the frame. The African Cities Readers is self-published by us and Chimurenga, which was a completely heterodox and open platform for any genre, any format, and that was co-curated by myself and Ntone Jabe to try and stimulate the breadth of African perspective and experience that would respond to a very specific thematic. For example, the second reader dealt with mobilities and futures. The sort of publications also would be more policy oriented, like Africa's Urban Revolution, but again speak into those policy questions from the scholarly angle as opposed to the practitioner angle. Something like the Integration Syndicate that we published ourselves in 2019 as the ACC was about documenting and capturing a deliberative process with a variety of stakeholders around a very specific problematic in a South African context, which is spatial inequality, and trying to think through that and use visualization and use narrative as a way of capturing a set of important debates that could speak into academic debates, but that wasn't the audience and the orientation. And then finally, this publication that came out earlier this year was a good example where we tried to bridge Francophone and Anglophone divides within the continent. Younger scholars have recently completed a PhD or were busy with one, was given support, and very established scholars like Simon Becker and rising stars like Sylvia Cruz and so forth. And so this just gives you a sense, and I'm very happy in the discussion time to come back. And then of course, New Urban Worlds is an academic text that Malik and I wrote with a very particular flavor. So I just want to conclude then by talking about the labor of generating work into the sort of broader public domain. And this is just sort of in parallel to that, a timeline of the work that I've been doing with Tao Tavengwa, which is a magazine called Cityscapes that have anchored that. But around the magazine, we've also been experimenting with documentary film, with exhibitions, and most recently something called The City Show, which is a podcast format, which is a whole nother kettle of fish. And interestingly enough, within that, what we've tried to do is to articulate the voices of ordinary citizens and scholars. For example, the podcast in Beirut that we published 2 weeks ago, at Mona Harp was one of the leading urbanists from Beirut, with a fashion designer from the same city, sort of speaking about what has happened in the context of COVID and so forth. And so again, I want to insist that the labor here is not simply to equip more people to know how to play the game, but we've got to think about the function of websites. And we've just updated and relaunched our website. This is the podcast we've done. But as to sort of appreciate that whatever the genre, there's a lot of background labor that's required if we want to be inclusive. And that if we are going to be this open, there's going to be lots of failures and dead ends, and I can list at least half a dozen of unrealized, unfinished, incomplete, poorly thought out interventions. But what has clearly made a difference, as Nadine has also mentioned, is writing workshops. And we've just started a process for an edited volume, myself and Liza, a colleague at ACE, is working on, where we will, over the next year and a half, through a series of 3 workshops, work with the contributing authors into that edited volume. Mentorships is really important, spaces of opportunities for experimentation, as I've mentioned, and then just to really underscore that if we are not going to grow and dramatically increase independent African publishing and build that infrastructure, it's going to be very difficult to realize some of the objectives I think we all share. So in conclusion then, I think we all have to accept that if we're serious about this process, is that there is a fundamental tension in navigating what I would call the recognition system of the academy and everything that goes along with that in terms of top tier journals, blah, 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 and all of its built-in biases, whilst insisting and working also on the importance of investing in other genres and formats, because our audience simply cannot just be the world of the academy. It's got to be society at large. Thank you very much, Jenny.
Thank you so much, Edgar. That was really wonderful to see that oeuvre put out there and the work of ACC and your thoughts on the challenges of this publishing issue. Okay, I'm going to turn now to Saheed Aderinto, if you don't mind, Saheed, bringing up your, if you have a PowerPoint or just launch yourself in the group. Thank you.
Good. Can you hear me?
Yes, that's loud and clear.
Oh, thank you so much to Laurent and Jennifer for organizing this session. And my presentation is going to be broad and it's also going to be specific. I'm going to be talking occasionally about the general issues of publishing, predominantly from West Africa and of course from Nigeria, mostly from Nigeria. And I'm also going to be speaking from the perspective of the field of African Urban Studies. First and foremost, I would like to say that that at least we know that many decades ago, most of the urban studies journals, global urban studies journals, rarely publish on Africa. And we now see a lot of moves by many of these journals to publish articles on Africa. And of course, this is the right thing to do, not only because it's important for comparative urbanization or discourses of comparative urbanization, but also because, as Jennifer said at the beginning, it's also important for decolonization project, ways in which ideas from Africa are getting into the right places, and of course, the politics of recognition and the politics of intellectual validation. But regardless of how we position this narrative, we cannot talk about this problem without outside the context of the structural crises of knowledge production and education, especially from Nigeria, that I know a lot about. And this has to do with the kind of funding that academics have, not only to conduct research, but of course, to live a very decent life. And so every conversation about academic visibility, about increasing the participation or increasing the representation, active intellectual representation of Africa-based scholars in Western journals, these conversations cannot happen outside the context of the fact that most African countries are fighting hard to get the necessary resources for quality research and for quality publication. And we should look at it from that perspective, so that once there's no money for quality research, then that's going to affect the quality of publication and capacity to publish in respected or highly visible academic spaces. But we also have to recognize that the conversation we're having now is about closing the achievement gap. And in this way, one should not overemphasize the fact that many Africa-based scholars will continue to be able to publish in highly respected global urban studies journals.
I think we seem to have lost Saheed's sound.
I think that Saheed's internet connection is not well and he just left. So maybe we should go to the next speaker.
All right, well, just let's give him a minute to perhaps jump back in. I think he's speaking from his base in Nigeria, and his connection may not be so wonderful. So let's just hope he arrives in a minute. Otherwise, Kingsley, perhaps you can get yourself ready and we might jump to you if he doesn't arrive back shortly.
Okay, yeah, I'm set.
You're ready, okay. So let's, wonderful. Let's just give him like a few more seconds to perhaps arrive. We're a little bit tight on time today. This is the issue. Okay, so I think we'll take Saheed in two parts. And let's hear from Kingsley, Kingsley Madueke, who Laurent has already introduced nicely. So Kingsley, over to you, and I'll send a message to Saheed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Kingsley, you could put your video on and your screen share is stopped for the moment, yeah.
Okay, can you see it?
We can see the screen, but we can't see you. So perhaps share your video with us. Perfect. Over to you, Kingsley.
Okay. Okay. Is it good now? Can you see me?
I can't see your video again, you personally, but
you can see my screen.
I can see your screen is the important thing, yes. So on you go. I'll look at.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction and for the invitation to speak on something I'm very, very interested in and passionate about, which is the publication prospects of African-based scholars. Of course, it's about urban studies, but most of the problems actually cut across disciplinary domains. So for the next few moments, I'll be speaking from the perspective of African scholar based in Africa. And to a large extent, what I'll be sharing actually represents the experiences of several scholars that I've been in touch with here in Nigeria. Just to point out that I am a lecturer at the Center for Conflict Management and Peace Studies, and the focus of my research is actually urban violence. But I interface with different social scientists here in the University of Jos, University of Amsterdam, where I got my PhD, and then urban scholars at the University of California, where I spent last year doing an international urban studies fellowship. So I will start with, by way of a story. I have just very few slides, and I hope the slides actually communicate very clearly the situation or the circumstances that the young African scholar based in Africa find him or herself. So the first problem from a very practical and very concrete point of view is a large number of African scholars don't even read urban studies journals, no access to them. From my discussions with colleagues, most of them just end up reading, of course, abstracts. And you have these paywalls. And because of the institutional problems, the structural issues that bedeviled the African university, I mean, the Nigerian university to be specific, we don't have subscriptions. So at a personal level, of course, we cannot actually afford these journals. And then at an institutional level, we don't have subscriptions to them. So the first problem is lack of access to even the knowledge. And this is a major problem because it branches out and affects every other thing that the African scholar does. And of course, we know the high rates of rejection, and it is the same reason, it is the reason why we are having this discussion. And many scholars here are kind of, they're a little bit, not just concerned, but very, very, I mean, frustrated. And you hear people speak about, is it discrimination? Or is there some reason why African scholars cannot? I met somebody, and this is the story everywhere, like I've submitted severally, and I keep getting these rejections. And a major problem is how these rejections are being communicated. Many people think some of them are offensive and insulting. And so you have, I had a situation where an individual was telling me how he even wrote a rebuttal to a rejection letter he received, which was very offensive. And I just want to share this with you, because after the frustration for most African scholars is they quit trying to submit to so-called international journals. It is the default mode for most people. They just quit because they get frustrated. And just on a lighter note, just to give you a sense of what many African scholars, the kind of mindset that they have after repeatedly receiving rejections is, this is on a lighter note, and it's very humorous, but it communicates the mindset that I'm talking about. So I'll read it. It's, dear sir, madam, and other, please find enclosed the latest version of my manuscript. That is the revised revision of the article. And he goes on to say, choke on it. We have again rewritten the manuscript from start to finish. Hopefully, we have suffered enough now to satisfy you and your bloodthirsty reviewers. I shall skip the usual point-by-point description of every change we have made in response to the queries. After all, it is fairly clear that your anonymous reviewers are less interested in the details of the scientific procedure than in working out their personality problems and sexual frustrations by seeking some kind of demented glee in the sadistic and arbitrary exercise of tyrannical power over hapless authors like ourselves, who happen to fall into their clutches. Now, this, of course, is on a lighter note, and it's just a very humorous way to put it, but it represents, without any form of exaggeration, the kind of, the sentiment of many young African scholars in relation to international journals. So this is just the story. And but what are the problems? And in my discussions, there are a number of them. that stand out. And I'm speaking from somebody, of course, that has benefited from a number of fellowships and grants. And I know the extent to which this has enabled me to actually contribute to international discussions on urban violence, to be specific. So I think we can talk about the institutional framework and how we need to change it, but a very concrete way to actually intervene is to provide funds and opportunity for empirical research. Simple, that's for the young scholar, from the perspective of the young scholar. Because I met colleagues that for 6-7 years, they have not been able to conduct empirical research in any form because they don't have the funds, and the university, the focus of the university here is predominantly teaching. So there's this, and that takes us to the second problem. The teaching responsibilities on the young African scholar is overwhelming, leaving very little or no time and energy for research. And these are very tangible problems that when you speak to any young African scholar, and especially in Nigeria, these are the problems that they tell you they face every day. Another problem is lack of mentorship in writing and research methods. And there's a very, very visible disconnect between the established African scholars and early stage African researchers. And this gap is a very costly gap, because what it means is the young researcher has no elder in the African sense of the word to hold his or her hand and lead them through and show them the ropes. So there's a strong need for establishing mentorship programs. And in my discussions here at the University of Jos, I was really impressed, to find out that, for example, in the Department of Sociology, they have been creating some platforms to encourage mentorship, to bring young scholars to collaborate with more established colleagues. And we're trying to do that too at the Center for Conflict Management, where we have recently started a seminar series that brings together young scholars and established scholars who can then discuss, engage, and also fashion out ways of collaborative research. Another problem that it's very visible but has not received much attention, especially when I speak to colleagues here, is journal editors reject manuscripts without giving convincing explanations. And of course, this is, so over and over, I meet colleagues that they are not very convinced that the rejection is valid. So I am just wondering, to what extent can editors actually maybe always add an addendum to review responses? Like when you have a reviewer sending a review, it will do good if the editor can add something to further explain why this manuscript will not be accepted. And because, I mean, as much as the rejection is very valid, it's important the way we communicate it. And it's a problem that may not seem like much of a problem, but it is really a problem. So then lack of funds for attending conferences. And this is very important, and it's linked also to lack of opportunities for conducting research. And conferences is not just about, of course, we know this is a very obvious point. It's not just about just sharing knowledge. It's much more about networking and future establishing alliances for future collaborations. And I can speak for myself that attending conferences, especially international conferences, have given me the opportunity to network. I mean, Professor Laurent, I mean, it's through conferences and workshops and such engagements that I've been able to network with such people. And networking with them has actually opened up opportunities that I wouldn't have been able to access without being part of those conferences and workshops. Then, of course, we have the problem of pressure to publish, to meet promotion requirements for the young African urban scholar. It's a major problem because, I mean, if you look at the lifespan from the submission of the manuscript to the publication, roughly, let's say 8 months, 9 months, some running 14 months, 16 months in some cases. Now, for Nigerian universities, we have a 3-year promotion cycle. And at every stage, you are supposed to present a number of publications. Now, there's a lot of pressure because you are teaching 85% of the time, leaving very little time and energy to do research. Now, if you look at that, if you consider the fact that you have to, without these publications, you can't be promoted. So most African scholars will settle for journals that will, I mean, publish their work in very good time. And unfortunately, sometimes they fall prey to predatory journals. And it's quite an unfortunate situation. So I'll just go through some suggestions.
Kingsley, sorry, can I just jump? I think we're running a little bit out of time here. So I wonder if you could just make your points. I mean, we're really loving listening to you, but perhaps just make the final points quite quickly, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I will. So they're in bullet points.
Great.
So the first is make urban studies journals more accessible to researchers in Africa. I don't know if there can be some MOU with African universities or departments of urban studies to just find a way of making these journals more accessible. The paywalls are keeping a lot of researchers out of the knowledge and knowledge production process. Secondly, involve African-based scholars as editorial members and reviewers of urban studies journals. This is a concrete step. And then thirdly, offer research fellowships and grants to African-based urban scholars. These fellowships have been a beneficiary of Urban Studies Foundation fellowships, and I can tell they go a long way in helping urban studies scholars to publish in so-called international journals. Then lastly, organize workshops and training in academic writing and research methods, workshops for African-based urban scholars. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Kingsley. What a wealth of ideas and comments, and very well expressed. Thank you for that. So Saheed, you're back. Welcome. Shall we turn to you for the last word from this panel before I introduce the editors for some responses? Saheed, over to you.
I'm sorry that maybe I should put my video off so that we probably have a better connection. Let's see if that will help with the connection. Okay, yeah, so I would like to again thank you guys for inviting me to make a couple of points about publishing issues. I think the previous speakers have touched on a couple of ideas and issues I would like to raise, and the ideas can be divided into two areas. One is the structural one, which has to do with questions of funding, questions of academic culture, and questions of lack of serious conversations about what does it really mean to be an academic. I think that until we have serious conversation about what it means to be a scholar, what it means to be a researcher, what it means to be an individual interested in creating knowledge for the public, for public good, I think we won't be able to get to the big to that questions of improving the quality of writing and publication of Africa-based scholars. For me, I think that the problem is more than funding. I agree with Dr. Kingsley and other speakers that there's funding problem, but funding alone, based on my experience with running the Lagos Studies Association, is not going to solve the problem. There's a need for a complete reconfiguration, rejuvenation, a kind of a rethinking of what actually does it really mean to be an academic. And this conversation should happen with younger academics, people who just received their master's, colleagues who are starting their PhD, to actually have a serious, deep internet search for why they would want to be a scholar. And if we don't have a big theoretical, philosophical conversation about the roles of academics in the production of knowledge, we may not be able to get to the questions of increasing the feasibility of Africa-based scholars in global urban studies journals. And that particular, for example, goes to the question of academic culture. So Dr. Kingsley brilliantly espoused the question of promotion, brilliant. And I agree with him that this very fast promotion cycle of 3 years is why people just have to keep up. They have to publish at a rate that would meet their promotion cycle. And if they can't wait for long gestation period for most of the journal, it means they would or could be compelled to publish in vanity or predatory journal. But the other question is, why can't we have a system that actually promotes decent living for everyone, regardless of whether they are junior academic or senior academic or mid-career academic? Because the pressure to publish is directly related to salary, to remuneration. But if we have a system that gives decent living wage to a young PhD holder, the person, he or she or they, may take their time to actually do quality research and not be put on pressure, the pressure to just publish, because without the publishing or without those publications, they cannot be somebody. The other point is the last point I just made. They cannot be somebody. We need to correct a systemic problem that does not respect junior scholars. The reason why junior scholars must get this promotion on time is because without those promotions, they're not going to be respected. Without the differences between being a senior lecturer, the differences between a lecturer one within the lecturer two, all these problems themselves are directly linked to why people need to publish at a speed that will allow them to move on the promotion level. And because we have a system, a very bad system, that doesn't allow junior academics to be respected, that ties power within the system to the ranking of academics, then we can't have the conversation beyond the question of saying that we have to increase publishing. So for me, the first conversation I would like to have is let's have conversation about systemic violence in the system. It's a violence culture that doesn't allow younger academics to be respected and to be decently treated. Why do we need all this promotion every 3 years? It's because if you don't get those promotions, your colleagues would think you're just an idiot. And this ties to the questions of poor publishing culture. And I will move away from that philosophical questions of one, asking questions about why do you really want to be an academic? Two, the fact that funding alone is not going to solve the problem. Whether we like it or not, scholars like Dr. Kingsley would always have funding to do research. But we should increase the opportunity for more than Dr. Kingsley, 4, 5, 6, 7 people, more and more people to have the kind of access that you have that could help other people, which I really like the way you espouse on that. So let me now talk specifically about the mechanical aspect of increasing the feasibility of Africa-based scholars in international urban studies journals. We all know the manual. The first manual is to say we have workshops, right? Writing workshop. But based on my experience of running the LSA, the Lagos Studies Association, for the past 5 years, I can say that those workshops have to be consistent. They have to be consistent. They have to be done every year. And they shouldn't stop after the workshop. There should be a way through which the facilitators of the workshop should continue to have conversation with attendees of this workshop after the workshop. In other words, a 2-week, a 1-week, a 5-day workshop is not going to produce the right result if there's no way or strict way to continue the conversation. And one way to continue the conversation, like I said again, is for it to be held virtually on a yearly basis, especially at a big conference like the LSC, that allows the journal editors to then have consistent conversation, tying back to the previous conversation and making suggestions for the future. The other point is to have conferences in Africa that curates top-notch scholars. So when I use the word curate deliberately, there should be a kind of a decision, a deliberate decision, a well-structured decision to bring in international scholars, urban studies scholars, into for conferences on Africa and make these conferences accessible. For example, just 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, the 5th Legal Studies Conference ended and the conference was free. One of the participants said that he was happy to see Laurent at the conference, and because he has read a lot about his work, and I thanked the association for bringing Laurent. The truth of the matter is that if we made this guy to pay for the conference, he wouldn't have been able to see Laurent speak about his book at the last LSE conference 3 weeks ago. So the question is not just to say we're going to have a conference on urban studies in Africa. The conference has to be curated. So curated within the context of specifically, especially attracting global scholars and providing access to these conferences free of charge. It is only when these conferences are free, and it's only when there's a strategic attempt to invite top-notch scholars to conferences that I think it will make meaningful contribution. The other mechanical point I would like to make is about mentorship, mentoring or mentorship program. I happen to be the editor of Journal of West African History, published by Michigan State University Press. And what we do in that journal is we have a mentoring program that basically looks at a manuscript that is promising, but it's not ready. So we have a couple of highly respected senior academics who have agreed to be part of the mentoring program. So what we do is to say, this manuscript is good, but it's problematic maybe because of the writing, it's problematic maybe because of the exposition of ideas, maybe because of the theoretical frame, or maybe it's not speaking to the right literature. So the senior scholar then works with the junior academic, mostly from Africa, to bring the manuscript up to a level that is publishable. And this could last forever. Now, the whole idea is, of course, that doesn't mean the manuscript is going to be accepted because we're still going to send it out for peer review. But it's actually a way for junior Africa-based scholars to learn directly from senior academics about exactly how to publish. And so one possibility is to have mentoring program. But regardless of how, because I don't have enough time and I want us to have conversation. So I will just spend the last 2 minutes summarizing what I've just said and stop there so that we can. So the point in emphasis is that to increase the visibility of Africa-based scholars in global urban studies journals is an activist project. Yes, it's a project that is deliberate, that is serious, that is consistent. It can only be done and thoroughly executed by academics who are ashamed, if that is the right word, quote unquote, about the inequality, global inequality in knowledge production, and who have decided to use a portion of their own life and time, of course, their family's time, to help develop serious and consistent visibility for Africa-based scholars. Now, whether we're talking about the questions of workshops, we're talking about funding, we're talking about writing workshops, all these problems cannot operate outside the context of, I want to have that conversation, a conversation about how junior scholars are treated and how the way junior scholars are treated shapes how they approach research, and how they approach research shapes the kind of things they write and why their writing cannot be globally feasible or of bad quality. I would like to stop there so we can have conversation.
Thanks so much, Saheed. That was really motivating and really insightful. Thank you. We're a little bit over time, but I think that is not a bad thing. We have got plenty of time, though, to hear from the two journal editors who have volunteered to respond and provide some input from the perspective of their journals. And so I introduced, first of all, Liza Weinstein, who is Associate Professor and Chair of Sociology at Northeastern University. She's also an editor of the International Journal of Urban and Regional Research, which is one of the leading journals in the field. She has spent her academic lifetime working on Indian urban politics and spent a long time in India. And her work is really very inspiring also for those of us working in African context. So I encourage you to look that up. Her book she's working on, called By the Bulldozer: Demolition, Dispossession and Resistance in the Governance of India's Cities, will be one to watch out for. So Liza, over to you.
Thank you for that very generous introduction, Jenny. And thank you for inviting me to participate on this panel. This has been illuminating and I think extremely important. I think my primary role on this panel is to listen more than to contribute. So I'll keep my comments brief because I think that the 4 panelists that we heard from prior were the important sort of substance of the panel. So from the perspective of IJUR, we've been thinking about these issues for a number of years, primarily from the perspective of language and how do we make urban studies more inclusive. For the first few decades of IJUR's 40 years or so, I think those conversations were more thinking about Europe, the non-English speaking world, and we've come to conversations about the Global South and how to be more inclusive of scholars from the Global South and scholarship from the Global South more recently, as has been pointed out by some of the panelists. We're thinking about these issues and we're grappling with them in important ways, and the comments today I think will help us further grapple with those. But there are sort of 2 main areas I want to speak about where IJUR has been sort of trying to intervene on these issues, and where we have work to be done further, certainly. And then I want to conclude by sort of just summarizing very, very briefly some of the points that I heard today that I plan to sort of return back to the editorial collective with. So in terms of the 2 main areas in which we've been putting most of our efforts on these fronts, the first is really in terms of diversifying the variety of formats for publication. This was a comment that came up in Edgar's presentation, it came up in Kingsley's presentation, but that the traditional academic scholarly article isn't necessarily the only way that scholarship can be communicated. And it's important, and IJUR has sort of grappled with formats and thinking about, in addition to the sort of scholarly article, what other approaches can we take? And we've had formats come and go during IJUR's 40-year history or so. We've had a feature called Urban Worlds at various points. Nick will speak more about interventions as a format that IJUR has for sort of the non-traditional article, but we've also been really thinking about how we can use the web. And the web for a variety of reasons. One, because it can be more creative, it can be more open to different types of intellectual production, but also because it gives us the luxury, the opportunity to avoid the paywall. And the financial underpinnings of journal production is sort of a very key point of this conversation, and one that I saw a question in the chat from Louise Jezierski about whether the EU model of open access might be a way forward. And I think that it's complicated as journals are, the financial operations and underpinnings of journals are shifting from sort of a consumer-based model to a producer, an author pay model. Those are producing new forms of exclusion that will reproduce the exclusionary practices. But the web provides us an opportunity to sort of sidestep the paywall, at least for some of our content, and for thinking about ways that we can be linking what we do in the journal to what we can do outside of the paywall on the web. So the second area, in addition to format, so thinking not only what we can do within the journal, but what we can do on the web, also thinking about what we can do as a journal in terms of building social networks and developing relationships with scholarly communities. And one way that IJER has worked to do that is through its partnership with RC21 through the Summer Winter School, by developing cohorts of junior scholars from around the world and providing the funding through the IJER Foundation and other financial mechanisms to be able to support scholars from the Global South, including from Africa. But, and those formats and sort of the long form that we've been able to do through these summer winter schools that allow people 10 days, 2 weeks to really develop relationships, develop ideas, workshop papers, build mentoring relationships, but also building peer relationships. And I think peer relationships are an extremely important component of these social network building. It's not just about mentorship, but it's about building scholarly communities of scholars based in the global north, based elsewhere in the South, who understand and have social ties and sympathies towards scholars who work through different formats and have different institutional constraints. And that becomes very important for journal editors also participating in these forums for expanding our base of reviewers. I think that that's a really important piece of this as well. We think about these networks as really about sort of the peer support or the mentoring support, the journal editors and the authors, but also how do we create groups of sympathetic reviewers who will be willing to provide that substantive feedback that many of the panelists spoke to today, that should, that can not only be provided by editors, but also by reviewers. And how do we sympathetically and engagingly review the articles that we're asked to review? And I think that social relationships really underpin a lot of that. It's much easier to write a sort of a reject without much substantive impact if it feels like more of an anonymous endeavor. But when we're invested in the success of our peers and our colleagues around the world, we will write those reviews that are oriented towards supporting them. So, those are kind of the two initiatives I wanted to talk about, but in terms of what I can bring back. The first thing is seems like such a low-hanging fruit is really how we reject articles and how we work with scholars to provide the substantive feedback. I heard those comments come through very clearly in Kingsley's presentation, but also in others, that this is an extremely important and not extremely laborious task, that we can really be thinking about the people at the end of the decision letters and how how we can be providing useful feedback for authors, even if we are not in a position to publish the specific pieces. And then thinking about how editors and editorial boards can provide more mentoring roles and can intervene in a mentoring capacity for scholars. And there are initiatives that are being started by journals to actually utilize editorial board members in a much more active way to work with scholars to develop those skills. And then also thinking about how we can use our foundations and the small pools of resources that we are able to provide to support research funds, conference attendance, and networking. But also, I think we've learned a lot over this past year and a half about the possibilities of Zoom, and that we don't necessarily need to travel long distances or spend considerable amounts of money to engage in some of the networking activities that we can sort of do more feasibly with these technologies. So those are my comments.
Thanks so much, Liza. That was fascinating and really good to get your perspective. Now we're very, very pleased to welcome Nick Theodore here. Nick is at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and is a very well-known scholar for many, many different publications on policy mobilities, neoliberalization, and so on. What people may know a little bit less about is his work on collaborative work he did on informalities in South Africa and other places in Southern Africa, where I bumped into him in Cape Town once, pursuing this work. and also a lot of committed, engaged research with precarious labor and unions and so on. So Nick, we're very pleased to have you here. Nick is the former editor of Antipode and is currently on the IJA editorial board as well. So Nick, it's so early in the morning, Chicago, and you've been so patient sitting through all the stories. So we're really, really pleased to hear your thoughts. So please take your time. Everybody will probably go in for an extra 10 or 15 minutes. I've asked you to put in the chat your comments or questions you might have. So chat amongst yourselves if you like, and we'll record, the chat will be downloaded and we'll circulate that. So we just all can take a deep breath and we'll take a little bit more time for the discussion for those who are available. So Nick, over to you. Thanks.
Okay. Well, thanks, Jenny, and good morning, everybody. Good morning from Chicago. On behalf of Antipode, a radical journal of geography, where, as Jenny mentioned, I'm a former editor, and on behalf of the Antipode Foundation, where I'm a trustee, I wanted to thank you for including us in this important discussion. In an effort to enrich scholarly debates, Antipode has undertaken a number of efforts to expand authorship to underrepresented groups, countries, and institutions. I'd say that there have been three main types of activities: outreach, translation, and investment. For our discussion today, and because of the time, I'd like to focus just on the translation and investment activities that the journal has been up to. But I'll begin by giving you the punchline before I go on. None of these has been as successful as we would have liked. So back in 2016, the Antipode Foundation launched a translation initiative in collaboration with the journal. And this initiative had three components. The first was to commission 4 or 5 new or existing papers from senior scholars in non-English speaking countries. The second was to pay a translator to translate those papers into English, and then to have those papers peer reviewed in advance of subsequent publication in the journal. The third aspect was to designate a translations editor, one of the 5 regular Antipode editors who would seek out additional translation projects moving forward. So this goal of this translation initiative, beginning in 2016, was twofold: to bring research that was produced in languages other than English out to the Antipode readership, and to send a signal to underrepresented regions and scholars that Antipode was a journal that welcomed scholarship from outside the stronghold of Anglo-American institutions. But to make a long story short, after several years, and after more than a few tears, we suspended the program. For various reasons at the time, it just wasn't working. And unfortunately, there aren't a whole bunch of great lessons to share. The failings of this initiative were particular to each situation. But the good news is, and there is good news, the good news is that the current journal editors are in the process of rebooting the program, though with a few key differences. These differences include, first, focusing more on early career researchers. Second, having editors do more to mentor authors and to guide the process a little more. Some of the suggestions we've just heard from Kingsley and Saheed. Another change is that the idea is to add a translator or editor's notes where necessary to help situate the papers and explain any keywords that might be less well known to Anglophone readers. And the fourth aspect, picking up on the suggestions that Edgar, that Kingsley and Liza made, the idea is that the editors are going to be considering shorter pieces, interventions, book reviews, web-based things as a way to broaden the range of written work that is available through the journal and its website. Let's talk a little bit about investment. The Antipode Foundation channels royalties that it receives from the publisher back into the field. And it channels these royalties in several different ways. One is the international workshop grants. So this speaks a little bit to some of the issues that Saheed was just mentioning. So these are grants that go to groups to form workshops to stimulate research and discussion. We also have Scholar Activist Project Awards, which link activists and scholars in local communities to carry out applied research projects. And Antipode also has a new Right to the Discipline grants, which also are going to individuals and teams to stimulate empirical research on a range of topics. Each of these awards is about 14,000 US dollars, depending on the exchange rate. Now, we had hoped that these grant programs would yield submissions from well outside the global north. In turn, we hoped that the workshops and the research grants would drive greater submissions to the journal. But despite making grants to institutions in various African countries, we've seen few results in terms of publications. There have been very few submissions and even fewer publications coming from scholars based in Africa as a result of these grant programs. I'll conclude by reiterating the commitment that the commitment is definitely there on the part of Antipode and a number of other journals. At Antipode, Stefan Uma, one of the Antipode editors, is from Tanzania. So I'm optimistic that moving forward under his leadership and through his networking, greater strides will be made in reaching out to scholars across Africa. But it's clear from our presentations that we've heard today, it is absolutely clear that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. So Jenny, let me pause there and open it up for discussion. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Nick. We have not so much time for discussion, but I'm going to invite responses from the panel. Does anybody on the panel want to come back and perhaps engage a little bit with the editorial experiences, or also share their perspectives from the point of view of editing? First option, just raise your hand in the usual way on the reaction button at the bottom, or in person. Saheed, over to you. Yes.
Yeah, I would just like to comment a bit about the editorial process. Like I said earlier, the question is not just about making policies about how to improve or increase the visibility of Africa-based scholars in international journals. Strategic, direct, consistent investment has to be done, not only within the context of how to engage with ideas, literature, and theoretical exposition, but also with writing. So I'm aware of some journals where the editors would basically decide to pick on a manuscript and work on the manuscript from the first sentence to the last sentence, posing significant questions into the text and expecting the writer or the author to revise. Now, so the question here is that unless there is a consistent, well thought out attempt by editors to leave their conventional approach to editing, which basically says you're just going to read the manuscript and provide comment and engage with how to revise. It has to be more than that. And this will take a lot of time from editors. This will take some questions of the extent of editorial power. But it is only through this approach that some very promising manuscripts would be able to see the light of the day. So the conversation we're having today must go beyond the structural questions of funding to the questions of taking editorial work as an activist project. And that is the way I would like to see it to some extent. And the activist I'm talking about is a scholar activist project within the context of intellectual and global intellectual feasibility.
Great, thanks, Saheed. One of the points that I was really interested to pick up from Edgar was about questioning what an academic is and who do academics speak to. So what are our journals for then? So I'm interested in all these diversifying projects of different ways of presenting information. So I don't know if any of the other panelists want to jump in about putting a bit more substance on that idea, which I think is perhaps an important one, that we need to revise our own assessments of what an intellectual is, what scholarship means, and who it's for. Anyone on the panel or somebody in the group attending who would like to share their thoughts very briefly? I don't know, Edgar, if you want to substantiate that a little bit more. You gave us a lot of good input about that point.
Sure, and I guess maybe to give a bit of a corrective. So firstly, there are great comments in the chat function, and just to thank people for those. And it's a pity we have such limited time, because I think it would have been wonderful to have an opportunity to engage with those. But just to your point, and I guess I completely agree with the other panelists and the points that they made about just how deep the systemic problems are, the institutional systemic problems that actively prevent the emergence of a substantial cohort of younger and newer scholars into the field. So there's a whole bunch of things on that. Related to that, I don't want to underemphasize the importance of learning the craft. And to Saheed's point, sort of he made a very specific recommendation now about how the practice of editing can shift to facilitate that, which I completely agree with. I mean, the how of that, of course, is another issue. And I'm feeling deeply embarrassed now that I'm on the editorial board of some journals. But the point is that there's something about that craft, and there's something about also understanding that maybe by learning. So, for example, in the last week or so, 2 weeks, engaging with scholars who can't write an opinion piece to save their life, right? So they've got amazing data, incredible evidence, a lot to say, but they simply cannot translate that depth of scholarship into an 800-word piece that speaks out to the world. Now, there's something about learning that craft, which I think can also improve the quality of scholarship. And I'm very interested in, when we're talking about these workshops, we're talking about different editorial practices, we're talking about different mentoring systems, about how to begin to think through that as well. Because it also means that the editors are as guilty of that, right? They're as hopeless at those things as well. And that's the one point. And to Nick's point about language, I think, so I always, it always strikes me when I open a journal and there's an abstract in French and English, or there's an abstract in Japanese and English, so wouldn't it be amazing if there's an abstract in Yoruba or in Kiswahili, or, so these things I think can at least be some of the smaller steps that could be taken to just remind all of us that there are multiple audiences and genres to speak to. But obviously we shouldn't then lose sight of the basics. And I think both Kingsley and Saheed spoke brilliantly to that. And that's where we should start. And these other things that I was referencing is maybe things that one can build onto that, but we've got to focus on the basics. And so those are some thoughts. Thanks.
Oh, thanks, Edgar. I think perhaps you being more revolutionary in the first part, where you ask us to reimagine the basics, to be the people who can write for the public. So perhaps we're not very good at mentoring younger scholars in Africa because we just don't have those right skills. So it's a challenge to senior scholars too. Victoria Okoye made a number of those points in the chat. Thank you, Victoria. That's really very helpful. And I see also a number of points from Edith Egoavern, thinking about the reviewing process and how that goes forward. So I think some really good ideas have come forward about who should be reviewing. So much more use of African-based reviewers, people within the scholarly communities to be reviewing, but also how that review process goes forward. And I was laughing at Kingsley's statement there, because I think I felt that too. I think reviewing is a brutal and difficult process. And so the more it's socialized, the better. I'm very open if somebody in the audience wants to put up their hand and ask a question or make a comment in the next few minutes. You'd have to be super quick. But
sorry, just one point that didn't come up, Jenny, which I think is really important to just put in the mix as we're going to process all of this, is the open data movement. And the copyleft movements. And so I think as we build these formats, to also think about how we strengthen those movements at the same time, because I think that ethos has got to be part of this larger project of building the capacity of specific individuals, but there's sort of a broader system about access. And obviously that speaks back to the paywall question, but it is much more fundamental than that, right? It challenges our universities and it challenges our national science systems. And, and these multiple struggles have to be articulated because there's a deep political economy to all of this. And obviously we kind of have to remember that we've got to kind of do the work, but we also have to, there's got to be the advocacy and the polemic as well about the structural stuff.
Yeah, so this is an effort of consultation that we have to work together and find each other to do that. I have a hand up in person here from Faisal Umar. Do you want to make your point quickly for us, Faisal? Welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you very much, the organizers of this session. is a very brilliant discussion, I must say. And I have to specially thank Saheed and Kingsley, who have talked mostly about the situation in Nigeria. But one thing that is left out that I think we should also emphasize is the difference overseas training can make in people's capacity to publish in very reputable academic journals. And if we take the example of Nigeria, so many young academics have had the experience of publishing in a reputable journals as well as reviewing for those journals. I personally have the experience of publishing in an international journal and as well reviewing for those journals. But how do you get contacted to publish in those journals? You know, it's through publishing in those reputable journals. And then the editors can quickly contact you. I have this paper, can you review it? This year, I think I have reviewed 4 or 5 for different journals. So the capacity, we shouldn't ignore the fact that our colleagues that have been trained at home are not as capable as those that have been trained abroad. And when I say abroad, in the case of Nigeria, I mean Europe, the UK, US, including South Africa. You know, it's something that I think we also need to talk about. And I like the idea of organizing these workshops to improve the capacity of some of us or most of us in getting published in these reputable journals.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for organizing this session.
That's really very much appreciated. All right, I think that we're coming to the end of the extension here. And I'm going to leave the Zoom open for a little while. If people want to keep on adding to the chat session, feel free to keep on adding your thoughts or comments on the session. It's wonderful. As the Zoom downloads, it keeps the chat as well, which is a super record. And if anyone wants to meet informally or talk to one another a little bit, feel free to do that. So we'll leave this open for a little while, but I think it's time to draw this to a close because we are part of a conference where everybody's running off. So Walter, I don't know if you're awake or you nodded off again. Would you like to say some words in conclusion? Walter Nicholls?
No, I'm here, but I can't, my video isn't working. Oh. So no, I'm definitely here. And I would like to just thank all the panelists for their extremely interesting and incisive comments on identifying very specific problems and getting work out there, getting information out there, getting resources, but also general structural problems within the publishing world. And I think that combination of very specific issues and general structural problems is the way we need to sort of think. And I also think that I'm also very thankful for the editors of journals, the folks who are working for journals who have contributed to these efforts. You know, so I think Joe Shaw in the chat mentioned that they do have this international fellowship program that Kingsley Kingsley benefited from, and this is an incredible, and Faisal also has benefited from. So this is an incredible expenditure of resources that creates strong ties between academics on the continent to academics in the global north, and creates these types of networks. And folks go back and as Kingsley and Faisal do, and build networks in home regions. I think that's also a really sort of extraordinary expenditure of resources. And I'm hoping, my hope is that there could be a continued discussion between the several major urban studies journals, how to combine resources, how to combine ideas, and to sort of pool resources and create a general strategy in order to sort of translate this discussion into an actual reality. Because right now, one of the problems is that everybody does things in their own silos. And I think that actually sort of identifying, okay, what does urban studies do? What does Antipo do? What does IDER do? And perhaps pooling resources, perhaps combining ideas, perhaps learning from each other's experiences could create a sort of more comprehensive strategy that can actually produce important impacts. So those are my comments. from Los Angeles.
So much, Walter. I'm amazed that you paid attention to all that. Thank you. Walter's at the University of California, Irvine, and also involved in some of IJA's book publishing project as well. So we've got a lot to work on collaboratively. I hope that we set up some sort of potential for network solidarity between people in different contexts, the initiatives that are coming up from many different African contexts and scholars, which are excellent and amazing. And urban studies is seriously impoverished by not, urban studies, which enacts itself as international from within the North, is impoverished by not being much more part of those enthusiastic and creative, innovative approaches. So we've got much to do around funding, mentoring, reviewing, institutions, transforming our understanding of the academic, much to do. So I hope that we can start to build these solidaristic connections to try and make some transformation. So thank you to everyone who made the session possible. Thank you to those who spoke. And I'll keep it open for a while, continue informally. But for the moment, bye. Thank you.